Well, I think that we'll go ahead and get started then. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Monica Smith. I'm one of the co-creators of Revel 11 along with Joni Parsons. We started Revel 11 over 5 years ago now to create a community of women who wanted to have deeper dive conversations about topics that are meaningful to us. Of course, that doesn't mean we don't allow and welcome all genders, but communication is definitely one of those important topics for all of us. So I'm really excited to have Jennifer and Katie joining us this morning. They recently wrote a book about the challenges we face in this increasingly polarized world to communicate well and to have healthy conversations in order to have more meaningful relationships, regardless of if those relationships are in business, at home, or just with friends. You should have their bios in the email that I sent you yesterday. So I'm just going to hand this off to them, which will be followed by a Q&A in the chat area. Kate and Jennifer, welcome.
Oh, thank you. We're so glad to be here.
We are indeed, and to be a part of the community you're creating. We are so glad that there's so many of you, especially that have traveled with Revel 11 through this pandemic and maintained a sense of community. It's so important for our physical, emotional, intellectual health.
It's been kind of crazy because, we're Seattle based and we were all in person before. And so it's just been such a fun journey to go from a local community to more of a global community now, because we have so many people joining us from around the world.
Yeah.
So thanks again, Katie and Jennifer.
Yeah, we're really glad to be here. Before I share my screen, I wanted to introduce a little bit about us. You have our official bios, which is great.
Yeah.
But who are we as women and who are we as work wives? And I think even though we sort of look similar today, we do. Jennifer and I are different.
Really different.
Really different. So for instance, I'm a Buddhist.
And I'm a really practicing Christian.
I grew up sort of poor and working class, and I sort of have lived my life as a creative, as a humanitarian, and as a social entrepreneur.
And I grew up in a pretty driven family where achievement was really important, played college tennis, and have always been really driven to succeed and to create businesses.
Yep. I listen to rock and roll and rap.
Don't understand that genre. I'm all about country.
I identify as a liberal.
And I identify as a conservative.
So even though it seems like we're so different, we say often that we are two sides of one coin, but there's a lot that unites us rather than divides us. And I think that we can all agree that we've been in polarizing times, we've been in struggling times and disconnected times. And there's a lot of noise out there that threatens to divide us and fractionalize us based off of these sort of identity labels that we carry and have.
So we stand before you united not because we're perfect, not because we don't struggle with each other. We do. In fact, we work every tool we teach in the book, but very united because what we found is that the goals and values we hold are utterly so similar. It just seems that sometimes we try to go about achieving them in different ways. And when you get stuck on the different approaches, you find you're divided. But when you really, genuinely align around the shared value and bring curiosity as a tool, which we're going to talk about, there isn't friction like we're seeing in the world. So we're hoping we can bring a little bit of that to you today.
Excellent. We're going to share our screen now. So there we are, giving each other a high five in our party colors, which we took this picture about a year ago. Oh, let's see if I can get this to move forward. Here we are. So today we're going to talk about the curiosity cure, and really we're going to have a conversation. So we're going to give you about 15 to 20 minutes of context, of education, so that you can really understand where we're coming from. And then we're going to have a conversation with you and with Monica. We're going to explore the biology of human behavior. We're going to understand something called the emotional needs quandary. We're going to have a one-way conversation, and we're going to talk about the importance of perceptual curiosity.
So curiosity is such an important piece, and it is powerful. And one of the most important things we want to talk about is what is curiosity. So would you mind writing in the chat really quickly, when we say the word curiosity, what do you make that mean? What is curiosity for you? Get those fingers moving, friends. I love it.
Interest in others, open to learning something new, wanting to know more. Oh, our favorite word.
Wonder.
Yeah, we love that word. Caring enough to ask questions of others.
Absolutely. And I love this next one, answering to the why. And we're going to actually be really talking about that. But very first, Katie, would you explain kind of the different styles of curiosity that exist in the world, and then the one that we want to help people bring into the conversation?
Absolutely. So we did a lot of research about curiosity, diving into the literature and thought experts. And we are all born curious. We're wired for it. And there's 4 certain types. The first one is diversive curiosity. It happens when you're bored. I'm going to go do something and learn something new. Epistemic curiosity is really about our love of learning and our love of knowledge. So you might be really into birds and you're going to go learn everything you can about birds. Then you have specific curiosity, and that's about your desire to master an activity. You want to take those chef classes, sign up for the new spin class, and hone your skills. Now, those 3 forms of curiosity, they actually are pretty consistent throughout your lifetime and how you engage with them. Then we get to something called perceptual curiosity. Perceptual curiosity is something that's activated within you when something captures your attention. So when you encounter something or maybe someone that you don't understand, we kind of struggle. We become a little curious about that. But as we grow older, our perceptual curiosity really deeply lessens. So if we struggle with something, we ignore it. We actually don't become curious about it. And that's the curiosity that we want to increase today.
And so what we'd like to do to make this super practical is ask you to grab a little piece of paper or pens. This is not to go in the chat, but we want to make this so practical that you'll walk out of here understanding some of your relationships differently. So if you would start by writing a name down of someone you connect very easily with, so easily that it's a joy, it's a pleasure. You look forward to that engagement. The second one is somebody you struggle with. It's as if you miss. It's as if you don't enjoy the interaction and you can't quite nail down why it's a struggle. And then the third one, somebody that you just, that name pops up and you're like, really? Someone is completely in left field with, and you really can't find a reason and you cannot connect with them. You literally just feel like they may be from a different planet than you.
We all have those people in our lives.
We do indeed.
Especially coming off the pandemic.
We do indeed. And so what we'd like to actually start with is an acknowledgement that if you're normal, like us and like most of the world, you struggle to understand, like, and respect people. And we have to admit, some people struggle to like, understand, and even respect us. And that it feels a little bit like that finger trap.
Yep. So you might remember this from your childhood, right? You would get in here. And what happens when you struggle and you try to get out of the finger trap? You try to get out of the conversation, out of the relationship, out of the interaction.
Oh, I pull harder and harder.
Right. We feel tension, right? When the key to getting out of the finger trap is to move closer, release the pressure, and you get both released from the finger trap. We think that perceptual curiosity is a cure, a path, and a reliable framework to lessen the tension, anxiety, and awkwardness that you might feel in your relationships during this time.
And we want to acknowledge that this happens. There's no real cure to negate this. This will be the reality in life. So our goal is to use this as a metaphor to help you get through conversations, relationships that don't feel as tense as when you're in the finger trap. And so what we really want to focus on in this conversation is that when you're an intentional user of curiosity, you do 3 things really well and consistently. Number 1, you take real personal responsibility for how you show up in each and every relationship and interaction, not just some. You show up as clean as you possibly can to create connection. Number 2, You use curiosity as a tool to understand how you can listen, speak, and engage differently, to understand another person with a fresh perspective. And finally, you commit to communicating openly so that you can speak your mind, your truth, and hear others' truth and mind and find a way forward as opposed to being in that trap.
So we want to talk a little bit now about the biology of human behavior. There are certain invisible forces at work every time we interact. And we as women know that, right? We can feel an energy when we go into the room, but something's happening in our brain. So when we're calm, our brain works great.
Does indeed.
Right? So your brain is sort of like this if you hold your hand. This front part, which is your forehead, touch your forehead. This is your prefrontal cortex, and it's where curiosity, connection, communication, creativity, collaboration lives. It is the evolved part of our human brain. Now, around it, you have something called the neocortex, and inside that is the limbic system. The limbic system processes your stories, your memories, your emotions. On the inside, deep inside at the back of your head, you have something called the amygdala. The amygdala is scanning for threats all the time. It's how you react. It's your instinct, right? It wants to keep you safe. And when you're calm, it's all working in coordination with one another. But what happens, Jennifer, when we feel pressure?
Well, when pressure hits, I imagine you know this, the brain gets triggered. And it gets triggered to such a level sometimes that we lose control of our language. You feel hot. In fact, we saw it the other night on the Oscars.
Yep. Will Smith completely triggered.
Completely triggered. What happened in that moment for Will, to make it really logical for you to see, is in that moment, he was so furious, so hurt, so shamed by what happened in that moment. A bunch of chemical cocktails led on by the amygdala spewed to his prefrontal cortex, rendering him incapable. Well, I don't want to say that really, but rendering him unwilling to not be hijacked by his brain, and behaved abysmally. And one of the things we need to understand is that when you are hijacked, whether it's an earthquake, a tornado, a threat to your life, whether you're hijacked by real forces or invisible forces, perceived forces like shame, worry, fear, your brain goes into a fight, flight, or freeze state. And it can be hijacked for up to 26 hours, where your prefrontal cortex loses its strength, its executive function, and its ability to process successfully.
I find it incredibly comforting actually to know that knowledge, because we're all humans. This is what is at stake.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what it means to bridge the gap. One, it's to know human behavior. And two, it's to choose to know somebody, to know them at a deeper level so that you can care, build trust, and respect.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting, Katie, that our biology is stronger than any of us know. Mm-hmm. We've spent a lot of time in the past talking about our personalities, and they impact us, but our biology is hardwired. And you know what else is hardwired is our emotional needs. Yep. As humans, one of the things we may be not aware of is we are all looking for an emotional need to be met. It's in our innate need to want to have three things happen in our relationships, in our life, as an identity for who we are. And the first one is to be accepted. Mm-hmm. People really want to know that they belong to something. Revel 11 is doing a great job of meeting that need, giving people a place to belong, where during the isolation, loneliness was a pandemic itself. Secondly, to be understood and know that they make sense and contribute in how they make sense, and have an ability to share their story and their lived experience. And finally, humans have a deep need to be valued, know that they matter, specifically around contribution, and that they are seen. We can't tell you enough that if your relationship may be in a breakdown or in a finger trap, there's a good chance that one of these emotional needs is not being met, and in fact is in free fall.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that we have to meet all three emotional needs, right? We can meet one need and it can go a long way to bridging a gap. So when we struggle to understand, like and respect another, or someone's doing that to us, we're not meeting emotional needs.
Right.
That is the intentional gap to bridge, and being cognizant of it, being conscious and intentional about it is a real game changer. So we're up against another invisible force of biology.
Humans are judgment-making machines. In fact, you're judging right now. It isn't a bad thing, but the way we make meaning of who we are in the world, of language, we pull up an assessing machine that says, what's this about based on my biology, my emotional need, and my lived experience? This is how we make meaning of the world.
So we're going to have a little activity in the chat. And I want you to put in the chat, what is happening here? We'll load it all in. What is happening here?
What is the story you tell yourself that is happening here?
Your brain immediately
Made a judgment.
Yep. Let's see if we get any things in the chat. Fleeing, running away from something, running from myself. I love that.
I've done that.
Absolutely.
Shutting
Anger.
down, anger, great. Running
Shutting
from
down.
distress. Absolutely.
So our brains are meaning-making, judgment-making machines. We think in story, and it happens in less than a split second. Now what is happening? We all know it. Oh, I love this other one in the chat. This person has to run for gym class, but really hates it. This person is running to catch their dog. The truth is that we don't know the whole story. And that's why perceptual curiosity can go a long way as a tool to bridge the gap. So Jennifer, talk to us about curious conversations.
So what we want to finish our presentation a little bit with here is the concept of a paradigm shift. We know we're naturally wired to make judgment and to be assessing, but we also know that we're wired with this prefrontal cortex to elevate our behavior, our intention, and make some declarations that the way we want to show up is with genuine curiosity. So we really invite everyone, especially all of us right now in this session, is to ask yourself, how could I really change my style to be curious in my conversations? How can I be really genuinely interested in what the person in front of me wants to talk about? How can I ask questions that aren't leading, that I really don't know the answer to? Am I in these conversations ready to learn something new, or am I in a conversation to look smart? We do that. What about this? Am I in a conversation to say what's important for you and just you? I'm willing to be with you. And am I willing to, most importantly, stay out of fixing until I've understood your truth, your lived experience? Curious conversations have a completely different feeling. It's a genre to itself and has an impact that changes the way we connect with each other.
Absolutely. So we love this quote by Seth Godin.
We do.
Which is that the other person is always right. They're right about her feelings, her likes and dislikes, the day they just experienced, the narrative and story that they have in their head. That's their evidence of how they operate in the world. And they are very true also about the fears that they have in their life.
Yeah, they are.
So if we really, really want to bridge the gap, if we want to have better relationships that aren't this,
Right,
we need to travel to their place of right before we have any chance of connection and communication.
I want to go back to this really quickly because I was with American Red Cross yesterday. And one of the things they said about this quote is they said, notice it's just travel. It's not inhabit. It's not agree.
Yeah.
It's not even embrace. It's just being willing to travel in exploration to the place of being right. So I thought that was a great way that they said that. So I wanted to add that.
I love that.
And the other thing that great curious conversations really pay attention to are starting with open-ended questions that engage the prefrontal cortex, as opposed to questions of measurement. Now, Katie, when you and I were learning in sales and conversations, we were taught the 5W questions, and they're good questions. But these questions ask your brain to deliver validity, information, assessment, data. And that's important. They don't really open up your brain, however, to engage in curious, collaborative, innovative thinking. And then, Katie, there's one question that we've been taught over and over again to ask that actually has to amygdala, your amygdala, quite a poisonous approach.
Jennifer, why is there no coffee in the kitchen?
Really? I mean, like even hearing that question, why, it puts me on the defensive. Why is a question that actually has the brain split? It has the brain go to light or dark, fight or flight. The question why is not as valuable as we've been taught, and the brain science demonstrates that.
So what is one shift that we can make that would be pretty easy? We've been taught that the two-way conversation is the way that we build value and connection with another person. So it goes a little bit like this. Hey, Jennifer, tell me about your weekend.
We went to the beach and it was just outstanding.
Oh my God, I love the beach so much, but sometimes it's just too windy for me.
Oh, I love the wind. You have to expect the wind when
really?
you go to the beach.
You love the wind?
I do love the wind. I mean, how can you not love the wind? And I mean, it's just the most amazing thing. It's through your hair. It feels so liberating and free.
Wow, I've just never really heard that perspective before, but thank you. Yeah. So that was silly, right? That was a little dramatic, but how many times have we been taught, I contribute, you contribute, me too, I think this, what about that, right? It's a leapfrog conversation. It's competitive. It speeds really fast around a racetrack where one car zooms in front of another and another one cuts them off, right?
Absolutely.
But what does it mean to have a one-way conversation? What does it mean to have a one-way conversation?
Tell me about your weekend.
It was great. We went to the beach. We got to relax.
Tell me about what the relaxing entailed.
Well, it's been a really rough week. And so it was nice to take my daughter there and just feel our feet in the sand and really like reflect on the waves.
And how did Cal feel at the waves?
Oh, she really opened up. She felt much better.
Yeah. Because see, a one-way conversation honors the other person. It allows for them to actually fully have an experience of being experienced. We really want to say that again. It allows the other person to have an experience of being experienced. This world's fast paced. There's so much stress, worry, uncertainty that very few of us actually have a chance to truly be experienced. And what a gift a one-way conversation is. Because even in this little modeling, I could feel Katie's biology changed. She settled. She felt safer. And as women, we know that one of our core gifts we can bring to the women, to the world, is to let people feel seen, heard, understood, and experienced.
Absolutely. It reminds me that I have 2 teenagers, and I don't know if anybody can relate to that. And I know you have teenagers as well. When I'm in the car with them driving, they open up way more than when I'm sitting across from them at the kitchen table. When I'm on a walk with them or I'm out doing errands with them, they open up way more than when I'm like, let me ask you about your day.
You know, my daughter calls me, quit woodpeckering me.
Yeah.
But it's true, because what a one-way conversation looks like when we're both not staring at each other is it takes pressure off and the brain feels safer to explore and engage and not perform.
So what is some of the language that we can use to start curious conversations if we're not going to ask those kind of 4 W questions? Tell me more about. You hear this phrase all the time. It's great in coaching. It happens in podcasts. Tell me about. Opens up the brain, allows for them to speak what's top of mind. And then our job is to follow the energy and keep asking. I'm curious about. Will you share with me? Tell me more about that. What's it like for you?
Yeah. It's really important that when we're in a curious conversation, it's not agenda-led. Curious conversations are open-led, and they're led by the energy of the person we're in relationship with. And we want to share with you that there's one most powerful curious question, and it's silence. So many of us are uncomfortable with silence, especially as a question. But people's brains process at different rates. And it is a gift to give space to someone, to allow them to process and not rush to fill the noise, the gap.
Absolutely. So we want you to think back to those 3 relationships, right? Is there anything that you may be able to shift to better connect, especially with those last 2 as well? And before we open up for a conversation with Monica and you, we just also want to let you know that like we believe in you.
We do.
This is amazing work. And once that you practice it, your relationships and your conversations become easier. They really do. And so we just want you to be curious about how you show up, Be curious about how you think under pressure. Be curious about your language. Be curious about your energy.
Be curious, most importantly, about what's possible that you had no idea was possible. And be curious about this word care. How can you show care at a deeper level? And we just really invite you to be curious that gaps exist. And you can be the one who takes responsibility to bridge gaps and change your relationships. So Monica, it was a thrill for us to share a little bit, but what we love more than anything is a conversation. So thanks for letting us share and let's engage in a conversation.
Well, I am overwhelmed with thoughts right now. Especially, I wanted to start with the one-way conversation because it was a beautiful transition that you did from kind of the grilling, the back and forth, to then allowing space.
Yeah.
And so I want to explore that a little bit because I have grown up with the belief that when you're having a conversation, two-way is always better than one-way because you are expressing your interest by sharing your own personal, your shared experience. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
And so help us understand better that one-way communication, the benefits of, you know, like I would be nervous that if I'm not sharing my impression, that shows that I'm not really engaging and I'm not really being vulnerable. Do you know what I'm saying?
Love it. Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's what we hear a lot.
Mhm.
And actually the opposite is true in the experience. And here's why. I want us to go back and for all of you women here, think about a time when you were really seen, heard, experienced, where you felt a sense of, wow, it's like, I can't even give you a word. It's just like, whew, I was seen, I matter.
Mhm.
In that conversation, that person just poured into you. The pour in was actually their ears being willing to hear whatever you brought forward. And you are showing utter engagement, even more respectful engagement by not trying to mirror them, not trying to contribute, but instead by saying, I am so with you. And I think that word is, it's one of our power words, the word with. When I'm with another, I cannot deny them their dignity, their humanity. And in that moment, if I'm just with them and listening, we hear this all the time. That was amazing. That was a great question. And you know what question we usually asked? Tell me more about whatever word they brought up. And they're like, oh, that's a great question. I'm like, yeah, you know why it's a great question? Your brain wants to be seen.
Mhm.
So we're going to do that for you.
Another thing we talk about is people are really full cups. I'm trying
Yeah.
to like, oh, here we go. People are really full cups, right? When you're in a one-way curious conversation with them, with everything that Jennifer just said, you're allowing them to pour a very, very full cup. And what you're doing is you're giving them margin to then relax. That's the be with part. Mhm. Now, we do pour back in.
We sure do.
After we have a curious conversation that's really intentional, there is a pause. We actually say it's 5 to 8 seconds. And we say, thank you for sharing. Now, how can I show up for you?
Yeah.
Right?
Super
And this
important.
can happen at work, at home, and the relationship, right? Do you need me to show up as a friend? I have some feedback to give you. Are you ready to hear it? Because they have margin in their cup,
Yeah.
they can. That is when we are very intentional about what we want to say, what we want to contribute, right? Is it going to be a me too? I'm vulnerable with you. Is it going to be I'm
Yeah.
concerned
Yeah.
that there's certain words in your thinking that are limiting you from possibility? Or is it, hey, we have a gap and I understand this so much better now. And I have 1 or 2 ideas about how we might be able to move forward
Yeah.
together. So we call it wayfinding in our book. And there's just a certain series of moves that you do because you do contribute in the end. But in the beginning, it's a one-way conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, but not even getting there yet. I found it fascinating that I loved your 3 questions about think of someone who you really connect with.
Yeah.
And then think about someone who you just miss. And I'm just going to do a quick shared experience, but there is a woman that I've known for 15 years probably and see her socially. And I just avoid her because we just never connect because she's in my judgment, this is my judgment, she's so negative. And so what am I possibly going to talk about that's not going to be negative? And I did an experiment recently where I was asking a lot of questions, like just trying to figure out what makes her tick,
Right.
what makes her view the world so negatively. And what's fascinating is everyone has a story. And unless you ask to hear their story, it will never make sense. So I found it just even knowing a story makes my heart open more. And I walked away liking her so much more. And it's that judgment piece that we all need to get through in order to ask the questions. And so I thought that was a great observation.
Yeah. We, nothing more to add other than one sentence to what you just said. Curiosity can heal broken relationships.
Very much so. Yeah. I am curious also about, even down to body language, like showing up for a conversation. How can we better present ourselves to want to listen and to have an open heart and not have that face of judgment? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think because we all come to conversations with a perception and with our own slant. How do we not appear that way?
Great. One of our favorite phrases in the book is how you show up matters. And that literally gets down to body language as well and your energy. So we actually have all these tactics called biology disruption. How can I show up clean? Sort of like clean eating, right? How can I show up without a bunch of gunk in my head, a bunch of negative energy and residue? So there are certain things that we do to prime ourselves before we go into an interaction. And one of the things that we coach on is go lock yourself in the bathroom of wherever you're at.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling tension, anxiety, right? Like, right? Wash your hands.
Yeah.
Changing your body temperature. There is so much research out there about just simple things of washing your hands in super cold water, washing your hands in super hot water as well. It can change and reset your perspective. And while you're doing that, you coach yourself in the mirror to relax, to go in with your intention to connect, to loosen your jaw.
Oh yeah, it's critical.
To smile, right? And to walk in. And I know that might feel like it's against authenticity and vulnerability, but you're really coaching yourself to show up optimal and your intention. How do you want to show up? And if you have an intention to show up to say, I'm not going to engage in that networking event today, I'm going to show up, I'm going to choose to connect with one person, make that your intention and do it. Be conscious of it.
There's one.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Something I really also, we didn't put this slide in here, but it's another really important premise that exists in human behavior. And it's this: everyone is doing the best they can with the skills they can access in the moment they're in. See what pressure you're feeling, how your biology is, how you left a relationship. I mean, how you walked out the door is impacting this human suit you're in. Can't take your human suit off and on. So we have to go in with a kind heart, knowing that whatever is happening in the human in front of us, from that woman who you knew her story more to that, is that nobody's trying to be unhappy. People, we need to have some compassion and some grace.
Interesting. There was someone in the chat who said that they grew up in a homogenous community. And when I disagreed, I would respond, I understand how you feel, but I feel differently because so-and-so or such and such. And then when she moved to a different community that was very diverse, I learned to reply, I understand, and I feel somewhat differently. That getting rid of that but made a huge difference.
Yeah. I think MA must have written our book then. One of our well done. It's one of our big pieces is that acknowledging that two things can be true with the word and, whereas but splits. For example, exactly what she said, you can say, my daughter is behaving really poorly, but I love her. My daughter is behaving really poorly and I really love her. Like two things can be true, and is a utter change to the dynamic of a conversation. So but over and is one of the most important things you can do internally as you talk to yourself, and externally as you make meaning of the world.
Yeah. Okay, help me with this one. So I tend to be a really curious person, which is why we have Rebel 11. But I find that a lot of times it becomes one-sided. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like, I'll ask a ton of questions and it never goes the opposite way. Do you know what I mean? And so sometimes it comes across that they're self-absorbed, or like, wow, I just had this really intimate conversation with someone, but they didn't ask me one question. Can you help?
Yeah, it happens.
Figure that one out?
Well, I have some bad news. Most people don't really want to hear from you. They want to talk themselves.
Yeah.
And most people don't have the skills, have never acquired the skills. Would you agree, Katie,
Yeah.
to actually be curious back? Our human nature is fairly self-absorbed and selfish. And so this is a very natural phenomenon. And so one of the things we talk a lot about is expect to be listening a lot more in the world, and make sure you have a network of relationships who are skilled up, who know how to engage in curious conversations with you, so that you actually can really be experienced.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you find it's helpful to offer your opinion and like try to get the dialogue going? Or is it more like, you just accept that this is your role in this conversation?
I think it's a really great question. I think it depends on what your aims are, right? If I'm at work and I'm having a professional conversation and I have to collaborate, like I need to put forth, like things are on the line for me and what's at stake. In my friendships, I want to have a reciprocal friendship. And so I think that there's some cool strategies that you can do to just bring clarity and transparency. One of the things that me and my best friend do is we say at the end of every conversation, and we're very intentional that I'm having a one-way conversation with you right now. This isn't something I practice all day long. We're chatting, we're shopping, we're having fun, right? But when it's serious,
when it's real,
and it's real, I'm going to choose to have a one-way conversation. And at the end of it, I'm going to say, and how am I going to show up for you in this moment? What do you need from me? Do you need a coach? Do you need a cheerleader? Do you need a friend? Do you need me to be silenced? Do you need to process more? What do you need?
Such an important point you just made. I mean, like, great relationships are so intentional that we know the role and we can ask each other for what we need. And that is like psychological safety at its best.
It's also such an example of intimacy. It's just beautiful. That's really well said. We had a great comment in the chat about we should be curious to find out our own prejudices, biases, and judgmental attitudes and body language that makes others react in ways that we interpret as unmerited rejection or stiffness. And that it's so true that we should be so much more self-aware.
Yeah, I think the first basically third of our book is how am I priming my human suit that I can't zip off? My individuality, my preferences, my backstory, my biology, right? We are unique human beings, and yet we're not when it comes to human behavior, right? So a metaphor that we use in our book is that you are a kaleidoscope. You're a kaleidoscope. Everybody is a kaleidoscope. You have all these jewels that when you look through it, it patterns your world. Yeah. Tiny shifts pattern your world and how you view it. These rocks, they never end. Bias, geography, gender, economic status, values, belief systems, right? Yeah. You're never going to convince and cajole another person to change. This is their kaleidoscope. It's your kaleidoscope. So how do we learn to shift our kaleidoscope to see new patterns, to see new possibilities? Because those things are not going to go away.
I love your tools. I love the finger lock. I love the kaleidoscope. Just brilliant. Well, speaking of the kaleidoscope, let's get back to our friend Amy, the amygdala. Yeah. I loved how you named her in your book. Help us with some tools around, like, what do you do when you're triggered?
Okay, that's a great question. So first thing you have to do when you're triggered is say, oh, I'm being triggered. Essentially, there is a ton of power in verbally acknowledging what you're feeling. It's almost as if you need to narrate to yourself, here's what's happening. Number two, you have to acknowledge, you get a chance to acknowledge, wow, this is a real issue that I need to run from, flee from. There is true danger in this moment that Amy is responsible for keeping me safe with. So for example, if there is a car running at you, you don't say, I wonder what's happening. Is this real? No, you run and get out of the way. And the third thing is when you notice the trigger, you notice the cue, you feel hot, sweaty, bothered, to take responsibility to make a decision to interrupt that biology. So for example, I'm going to make it really real. My husband and I had a little bit of a rough conversation a week ago. And I wasn't feeling shame, but I was utterly irritated. And I started watching my brain feeling really bitey, snappy, crabby. And these words, I'm sitting there in that moment thinking to myself, like fighting words started coming up in my brain. And so I essentially had to say, this is not going well. The amygdala is telling me to run, flee, or fight. And so instead I said, I have to pattern interrupt. And I said to him, and we have this agreement, hey, my words aren't feeling responsible right now. I need to take a pause. Because fighting words can't be taken back. And he said, I honor that. Thank you. We went to bed, and the next morning, my prefrontal cortex had regained control. And I felt a little bit more able to see my part in the breakdown. And when you can get to that point, disrupting your biology and taking responsibility for your part in it, Amy doesn't get to ride shotgun. And instead, my prefrontal cortex, where executive function, language, curiosity, wonder, reason sits, is able to regain control.
Okay, so how do you do that in the conference room, though?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we really teach is that you have to gain control in the moment over your thoughts. And you can do that by gaining psychological distance from those thoughts that are jumbling in your head. The research shows that 50% of people believe that there is a voice in their head that they can hear like a monologue talking to themselves. The other 50% of the population just has thoughts. They don't distinguish thoughts from self and being. So it's really powerful practice to give a name to your inner narrator and to talk to that inner narrator to say, whoa, 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 those are really terrible thoughts. They're really negative. What's happening here? And that's also why the power of pause is so important. And that's hard for people who just want to jump in, right? If you've been conditioned to do that, you have to learn how to kind of gain mindfulness over what's happening to disrupt. Excuse yourself to go to the bathroom.
Absolutely.
I mean, literally, the bathroom's like our favorite friend. Like, go lock yourself in there, go to your car, right? Like, take a pause, and you can learn to reset, but it's a practice. You have to practice it. So practice offline. Talk to yourself and coach yourself out loud. Katie, what happened today? Or I actually call my inner narrator Becky. When Becky's annoying, I have Amy and I have Becky. Like it really does help me, right? We're trying to bring consciousness and transparency to our behavior, to our natural inclinations and patterns. And the key is to disrupt.
Okay, so back to that moment in the conference room. So say someone really triggers you. And you said just a few minutes ago that owning your thing when you're being triggered, so even saying out loud, wow, I was just really triggered. Like, is that an okay thing to say in a professional setting? Probably not. So then it's just power of pause. So it's just like, okay. And if it's not appropriate to excuse yourself at that very moment, is it just more like a really fast little chitty chat with yourself to say, okay, let's take a deep breath here and not respond inappropriately?
Absolutely. And it actually really is breath. Breath is the most powerful thing you can do. Inhale through your nose, exhale the cortisol out of your mouth. And, right. And the other thing to really remember is so right now, Katie and I are sitting by each other. Maybe we're having tension in the conference room, but how can I somehow elevate above that in that moment and see the dynamic and not choose to play in the dynamic? We have a chapter we love that's all about the triangle, the drama triangle, the roles we may play. It's a pretty well-known tool. And how do we actually stop dancing in a paradigm that causes that tension? How do we actually step ourselves out into a circle of choice and change our behavior in the moment? Katie said something so important. There is no silver bullet. There is no magic pill. It's intention, it's practice, and it's awareness. And it's catching your awareness as quickly as you can, taking it to breath, and then taking it to a skill. Catch, breathe, employ a different tactic. And, just because we practice this stuff doesn't mean we don't get triggered. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, is that the triangle?
Yeah, the triangle. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so repeat that.
The triangle is by Dr. Karpman, and it talks about the fact that there are some roles we play very unconsciously, learned in childhood, taught to us not only by our parents, but just by the way people show up, Disney, just media, like stories we play, and that there's always one role we're playing in the world, and it's unconsciously, it's victim, rescuer, or persecutor. And in that dynamic, unconsciously, we play a blame and shame game where we're unresponsible to act at choice. We're in a fear paradigm. And that paradigm isn't wrong. It's natural. It's our natural state. And with awareness, we have an ability to move to what's called the circle of choice, where you're response able, where you're at cause, where you're at resourcefulness, where you have much more authorship of how you show up. And so we just have to acknowledge that that dynamic in the triangle is pretty natural for us to play. It's the dynamic you're talking about in the boardroom. And that as long as we're in that dynamic, we're almost like being baited into a behavior pattern that we're naturally inclined to lean toward. And that's just a hardwired behavior that we can break. Neuroplasticity shows so much about that, and move to the circle of choice.
And I want to add one more thing.
Please.
We need language.
Oh,
in that moment, we need language too, because we can't just, breathe and not say anything sometimes. We need language and sentence starters that says, I would like to take a pause here for a moment because I think something important was just shared. Okay. So in chapter 11, we give all these different language starters for all these different situations of pressure that you're going to be under. Those are language starters to practice and memorize too.
Guess where we memorize them?
We memorize them
in the bathroom.
We do. Go to the bathroom.
In the mirror.
You go and you practice them in the mirror. How does your face look? How does your face look when you say it? Right?
Didn't know we
I
had.
love it.
I would really like to take a pause here because, and we have a question in the chat. People are going to thrash your values. People are going to pull you into their drama triangle. People are going to do racism, sexism, all the isms on you all the time. So what's a gap and what's a canyon? And you need to be prepared, right? To be able to stand in that as well.
And in response to your question, there are conversations that just aren't reasonable, aren't safe, that are actually poisonous. And in those moments, we have a lot of language in them. The answer really is to say, I'm here. You're crossing a line that I am not comfortable being in this conversation with. And if at any time we can change the dynamics into a genuinely curious conversation, I'm open. Or don't even say that. Like, you get to author your life about what feels like a gap as opposed to a brutal canyon.
Yeah. Well, let's revisit the purpose of having those conversations. So like there was someone in the chat talking about an offensive conversation about the Ukraine and Putin. And like what is your ultimate goal? Is it to find common ground? Like, is that what we're saying, that when, like with this polarized world and the ability to communicate more effectively, I assume that the goal that we are ultimately after is, well, let's find out what we can agree on and start from that point. Do you agree with that?
I think it's one.
I think it's one too.
I think it's another to also say, here's my boundaries, right?
Yeah.
If I have to work with a person who is consistently thrashing values, divisive, right? And and yet I have to collaborate through, then it's okay to say, hey, we have some issues. And I would really love to be able to work in an environment though, where it doesn't feel awful every day, or awful is too powerful of a word, where we don't have to struggle every day. So some of my boundaries are, I can't have this conversation
Right. With you. Really important.
right? Really important, right? To be clear is to be kind. Vulnerability and authenticity doesn't mean that you just get to show up and do what you want.
No.
It's about being intentional. How are you going to show up? What are your boundaries and what's your purpose and intention in this relationship or conversation?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and maybe it's wise to have some of this practice with friends
Yeah.
or acquaintances, and maybe not in the workplace. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. We really believe that one of the things that's important for us to remember is the workplace is a place we do work. It's a place where we bring our commercial and cultural selves for a product, for a relationship, for a work.
Yeah.
And, we've been in this polarizing pandemic where people have seen our inside of our homes, heard toilet flushes,
Mhm.
dog barking. I mean, like the world's been different. And let's all be responsible with what we bring to our workplace. It is work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We can bring our
And
full selves without the baggage, without the backpack of every personal issue we're in.
yeah, and I'm curious about your work, since you guys just published, correct?
Yeah.
6 weeks
Which
ago.
is, yeah, and congratulations on that. That's just amazing. I am curious how the pandemic has affected the result. Like, are people really anxious to talk about communication, or is it overwhelming? Like, what is your experience in releasing a book just recently?
Whew. Well, we're lucky. We're timely, right? We are timely. And so to anybody writing a book, there's a lot of magic in writing a book about timely and relevance and the zeitgeist and the conversations. And so the conversation we're in is, how are we all going to behave when we return to work, right? Which many of us have been working this hybrid thing. But I think an important thing to realize is that we've all changed.
Really
I
important.
changed, she changed, a lot changed in 2 years. So we have a really fresh opportunity to come with curiosity, to rebuild relationships.
Yeah.
And so we're just really excited and honored that we got to have our book published, that we get to be on sort of a national stage, and we've gotten so much amazing media. And I think people are hungry for it, right?
They
This
really
is
are.
the great resignation, the great reshuffle, or what we like to say, the great reset. We have an opportunity to show up better. Who do you want to be? What will you achieve? And how will you connect and collaborate to get there?
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely agree. Well, you guys, thank you so much for your time. This has been so enlightening. And everyone go out and buy their book.
Thank you. Please do.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
have really courageous, curious conversations, and bring that kindness and that compassion in every place you go.
I'm totally inspired to do that. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Monica.